Graeme Rendall, and Foo Fighters. Come aboard. Let's get weird right now on the Unidentified Celebrity Review. All right. I don't know what just happened there. Sometimes when these live streams start, there's like an echo. I don't know what's going on, but sometimes the live stream starts and I have to completely stop what I'm doing and exit out of the room and come back in. So I apologize for the rocky start here. If it seemed rocky, I definitely seemed rocky from my end. Okay. So let me just make sure that you guys are hearing me correctly. I got to check my settings. My audio settings, my microphone. Okay, everything's right. Perfect. Okay, so guys, welcome to the show. Brandy, Rodrigo, thank you so much for being here. We're going to have a very fun conversation today with a really wonderful author. But before we get to that, I want to remind you guys, of course, I think everyone in this chat so far has liked, subscribed, and rung the bell. So I don't think I need to say that to the people that are here. But just in case you haven't, go ahead and do so. Of course, ringing that bell will remind you of our huge event that we have in 7 days, literally 1 week from today, 6 days, 23 and a half hours, essentially. We're going to be doing the Big Phone Home. Surprisingly, I'm not nervous. I'm actually very excited for this. I can't wait. I was just telling our guests here in the green room, I cannot wait for this to be over. I want to be done with this. I want this day and all of this work to stop. I'm done working. I've been overworked. No, I haven't. I've loved every second of it. This has been a lot of fun. I've met a lot of new people in the process, and I'm excited for you guys to see what we've got planned and what we've got stored. So now that all of that is out of the way, I have a really, really, really fun guest today. Let's get that out of there. He is a contributing journalist. Say journalist? I think it is. Contributing journalist over at the Debrief.org, and he's also written a book. I'm embarrassed here. I had his information here, and now I can't find it. Blah, 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 blah. So what I'll do. Oh no! You know what? I also just noticed, Graeme, I didn't send you the new the new thumbnail, dude. I'm a mess this morning. There's a lot of stuff going on, but we've got Graeme Rendall here today. He's an author to The Ends of the Earth and a contributor at the Debrief, and more specifically, he just dropped an article on the Debrief about Foo Fighters and what pilots were seeing during World War II. And I read this article. I'm like, let's talk about it because this is interesting stuff, especially with all this talk about drones and swarms and everything happening nowadays. So without further ado, let's bring on our new friend, Mr. Graeme Rendall. How are you, sir?
Hello, Lou. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for being here. How's the weather over there in the UK?
It's sunny for once. I live in the north of England, so we're not exactly used to it.
Man, here I am wasting a sunny day for Graeme Rendall. Now I feel kind of bad. I mean, do you guys get a lot of sunny days over there?
When we do, we enjoy them. I've been out already. It's what time is it now? It's 20 to 7 here in the UK in the evening. So I've actually been out and enjoyed it today. So yeah, I had my lunch on the beach, so it was quite nice.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. Well, then I don't feel bad. Bad. You actually got to enjoy your day, so that's good. Okay, great. Well, so Graeme, let's start a little bit about your background before we get into the fun stuff. The fun stuff. I think your background will be fun too. So tell us where you were born, and where you grew up, and what was your childhood like?
Okay, so I'm a resident of a place called Northumberland. It's a county in the UK. We're the most northerly county in England. We're right next to the Scottish border. I was born near Newcastle upon Tyne, which some people might have heard of. It's a big city in the north of England. It's got a famous football team, even though they don't do very well at the moment. I was born in 1966, so I'm quite old. I'm nearly 55-year-old. I got into UFOs in 1975 when I bought a book that I liked the cover of. I was interested in science fiction. It had a picture of a flying saucer on the front of it. So, of course, it was something that I was sort of interested in. But when I picked it up, it was a book that was factual, or at least seemed to be factual, rather than a fiction book. But that really got me into the subject. I was also interested in sort of World War II by that stage, and actually beforehand. So my interest in what we'll be talking about in terms of the Second World War actually predates my interest in UFOs. But they've gone hand in hand in terms of how much time I've sort of spent on each. Like a lot of things, interests wane when you get into your teenage years or into your 20s, but then sometimes they're picked up again. And consequently, when the FLIR videos came out in 2017, my interest in UFOs was rekindled, like a lot of people's. So that's where that comes from. Yeah, that's pretty much it, really. I've always enjoyed writing, even when I was at school. But in terms of writing, like more kind of sort of professionally, if you like, I started writing for an aviation magazine that was based in the north of England about in the mid 1990s, and then it just took off from there, and I just started writing more and more.
Can you remember the first article that you wrote, the first time that you saw your article in a publication or something that where you're like, oh my God, this is awesome. That got you super excited. Like, I can't believe somebody took the time to read what I wrote and put it into publication and tell other people about it. That's a fun moment. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that.
So, yeah.
Wait, I'm sorry. Before you get started, I thought this was hilarious. Mick Westmore, open-minded cousin, is the comment we just got from John Poe about you.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, that's fun. I thought that was hilarious. So I just wanted to throw that in there. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Tell me about the first time. So obviously, being interested in the war and the fact that we didn't really get much in terms of German, bombing raids here. They're all down south and down the Midlands. I wrote about one specific thing that happened in August 1940 and put that in the magazine, in this magazine I was writing for at the time. And that was the first thing I wrote. And it was only probably half a page. It wasn't too much of an article, and I didn't really think much of it. And to be honest, I didn't get that much in the way of feedback either. But then again, you don't let it put you off. You just keep writing more. If you start letting setbacks dictate what you do, you'd never get anywhere. So I just kept.
If I listened to every single person that told me I probably shouldn't do that, I would have a very, very boring life right now. A very boring life. So I'm glad you ignored the naysayers. And also, I mean, what year was that when you dropped that article? 90.
That was probably 93, 94. It was quite early on.
The internet was pretty much non-existent. So to get like feedback from people was, I'm sure, a lot more difficult.
Well, it was because the magazine was sent out by post to people. It was a subscription only, and it was quite a limited run of just a few hundred people. So there was never any kind of way you were going to get enormous feedback and also instant kind of feedback like you do nowadays. Somebody would have to literally sit down with a pen and pencil or a pen and paper and actually sort of write something to you. So that was the only way you found out, when people just didn't do that. But nowadays you can drop something and then you get feedback from around the world. So it's so different nowadays. But back then it wasn't. It was much harder.
As an author and a writer, do you long for those days of past, where things aren't so quick and so opinionated? I mean, I'm assuming, and the same thing with my channel, you're going to get 1,000 people that love it, but you're going to get that one guy who really hates your channel, and they're going to let you know about it. And that's sort of the beauty of the internet, is you kind of have to hear it, but you don't have to respond to it. But I'm just curious. I mean, do you long for those days where you don't have to put up with this kind of stuff?
I don't know, because I think even some of the negative comments can be useful, because because if you look at it as constructive criticism, I mean, obviously the people who just say, I don't like it, and then they don't give a reason why. Well, okay, you can read it, but you can dismiss it because they're not really telling you anything beyond, I just don't like it, which is fair enough. But if they actually say, I don't like it, and then they explain why they don't like it, you can take that on board. And maybe it is something, maybe it is me rather than them, So it's all
I got to
worthwhile.
tell you, Graeme, that's a hell of a life lesson you just laid out for us, because I agree with you. And I'll tell you why, because on this channel, I invite people all the time to give me criticism. Tell me what I'm doing wrong, please, so I can fix it. And people have taken that to heart. They really do. Like they say, my biggest comment on this channel, things that I do is I cut off my guest speaker. Apparently I do it all the time. And I think that partly is because of my training as an improviser. As an improviser, you're taught when you're on stage with 5 or 6 other people and you're supposed to make up scenes literally as you go along. The death or the nail in the coffin for any scene is an empty stage. If people are just standing back there unsure, not know what to say, not know what to do, don't know how to start a scene, that especially if you're in a rehearsal, you'll hear the coach go, somebody step out, somebody say something. And so I've got that training just drilled into my head. So anytime I hear a moment of silence in a conversation, I'm like, blah, 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 blah. I'm immediately right in there trying to say something. So it's something that I'm really trying to correct. And the only way I can correct it is by having more conversations and engaging more folks like you. So if I do tend to cut you off, I'm sorry. That's my thing. That's what I do apparently. But I'm working on it. And the reason why I'm working on it is because people have been telling me, hey, please stop cutting off your guests. Let them talk. Let them talk. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. You're 100% right. I am something that I'm working on. And the beautiful thing is that everyone that I've engaged, and sometimes they leave really nasty comments the first time, but I'll engage them and I'll be like, hey, by the way, you're right. I agree with you. I'm changing it. Please stick around and hopefully you can help me grow. And they always do. They always stick around. They're always like, oh man, this guy's actually cool. Like he's not, I could easily be like, well, why don't you start your own show, jerk off? And then they get pissed and they never come back. And it's just not the way to interact with people, So
don't you think though? Don't you think though, if everybody just said, I live it, you'd be living in an echo chamber.
Exactly.
You need people, you need some dissenting opinions occasionally. It's just like the people who say, oh, we shouldn't be listening to people who are skeptical or debunkers. Well, okay, maybe there's an argument, but actually, if we don't, we are living in an echo chamber. We need people who have slightly different opinions or even majorly different opinions. There's no way we can just be everybody agreeing with each other all the time. Otherwise, we'll get nowhere, will we?
No. I mean, if you're surrounded by a bunch of people going, that's awesome, that's great, oh, best thing I've ever seen, start looking for some new friends to fill that circle, because they're not being honest with you. They're just not. Exactly. Because not everything you do is gold. You know what I mean? Like, I don't poop gold nuggets all the time. Not every one of these shows is phenomenal. They're going to be bad shows. And they're going to be, especially now, I'm sort of embracing the awkwardness of this live thing. Like yesterday, my girlfriend just come in from doing groceries and she's folding bags and you can hear all this. I'm like, babe, what are you doing in the middle of the stream? So I don't care anymore. I'm embracing the awkwardness, so when stuff like this, weird stuff happens, man, you can either freak out about it and try to hide it, which is not going to happen, or you can embrace it and make fun of it, which I think is the better option. All right, so let's get into sort of why you're here. And I wanted to talk about these Foo Fighters, and just FYI, I want to share this screen here as well. Let me get my share screen up here. I wanted to just point everybody in this direction. Just FYI, if you aren't familiar with Graeme's work, I have all of his links in the comment section down below. Oh wait, I just lost it. Hold on one second. Where'd you go? There we go. Okay. This is the new article he just dropped on the Debrief called "The Foo Fighters: Today's Pilots' Encounters with UAPs Are Nothing New." This article dropped on April 15th. I read it. I loved it. And I wanted to talk to Graeme about it and let people know about this article and point them to it. So Graeme, let's start with what I mean, I think this is your expertise. This is sort of where you're in your most comfortable zone. But what propelled to write this article now?
Okay, so it comes off the back of a conversation I had with MJ Benias, who's one of the editors at the Debrief, and I was talking to him just on Twitter about the article I'd written about the Chinese drones that dropped earlier last week, and it was just a throwaway comment about, oh, I'm going to go back to the book I'm writing on the Foo Fighters, which I haven't actually finished yet. I'm still researching and writing. Hopefully, it'll come out later this year. So he came straight back to me and said, "Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't mind, seeing an opinion piece on the Foo Fighters, because obviously it must have, piqued his interest." So it took me like a split second to reply and go, "Okay, yeah, no problem." So that's where that came from. That's the impetus behind the article, and it was a useful thing because you don't really see much time or space devoted to this particular, sub-subject, if you like, of the UFO phenomenon. It's always, people still think that the UFOs were first seen in 1947 with Kenneth Arnold and with Roswell. People don't always realize that there were actually sort of fairly major things happening just a few years beforehand. I mean, I know there are historical cases even prior to that, which some people do not maybe concentrate on, but certainly look at. But it always seems that this particular period during the war is something that just seems to be forgotten about. Yes, it's appeared in a few books and a few magazine articles, and some people do look at it, but it doesn't seem to be getting a lot of attention. But the article was a way of me just drawing the parallels between, what the likes of David Fravor, the F-18 pilot, the kind of engagement he got into, because it was basically him and a Tic Tac were basically chasing each other in a circle, if you like, in a kind of dogfight. But also what happened during the war. And MJ, when he sort of suggested I write this, he said, maybe just draw the parallels. And I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. So that's what I did. And hopefully that's how it's come out.
I think it is. I think you did a really damn good job about drawing the parallels. And as I was reading one of these stories, especially about the tail gunner, and how he was firing into this object, and this object was absorbing these things, and I thought to myself, golly, man, can you imagine if we had FLIR camera footage of that? Or anything, any pictures would have been killer. And we do have some pictures, and you're going to share those with us.
So yeah. What I'll do is, if you don't mind, I'll just tell a little story about it, and if you want to sort of jump in whenever you feel like
go for it, man.
We'll start this. So just to start with, a lot of the pictures from the war that purport to show Foo Fighters, like these three little dots here, who knows what they are? There's none of the pictures can stand up to any kind of scrutiny. So let's just move on from that. What I'm looking at to try and find some of the information beyond some of the cases which are already known or in the public domain, a good source of information is these kind of weekly air intelligence digests. These are American, by the way. That's from the 8th US Air Force, that were based in Britain during the war, the ones who were mounting the daylight raids over Germany. So you get these intelligence summaries, and they're for every week and for every raid. And there's a lot of technical information there, but you just have to look through them, and you have to know what kind of information you're looking for. But they are a mine of information about these kind of strange phenomenon. Now, the Foo Fighters were primarily a nighttime phenomenon, but there were things seen during the daytime as well. So you have to look across a wide range of information. And here's one report. And this is actually an RAF report from 1942. So this is a long time before the established, or at least what people thought was the start of the Foo Fighters, which the narrative is supposed to be they started in November 1944, and it was that the American night fighters pilots were seeing them. But this, if you can see here, the top paragraph, the date is 11th to 12th August 1942, and the middle paragraph says, a bright light rose from the ground to 8,000 feet, where it flew level for about 2 minutes. It appeared to zigzag along the ground before taking off in a climbing turn, and then it flew level for a period of time. So this is what they were describing them as rockets, but who knows what they were, because there weren't anything that can be reconciled with the German technology. Now, a lot of the time they thought they were encountering these at night. This is a very early German jet fighter, but when they said they were seeing them, these weren't actually in service during the night because there were an aircraft that only flew in the day.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to fit aerials to them for airborne radar, but the pilot, because they were so difficult to fly, they were very early machines with very temperamental engines. The engines only lasted for about 30 hours before they blew up or broke down. They were extremely temperamental. In fact, when you were trying to take off on one of these engines, if you opened the throttles up too much, they would flame out or catch fire. So this is the kind of technology they were dealing with. There were very, very rudimentary jet aircraft. Yeah. So they put aerials on these, but the pilot was going to be overworked because he had to fly the aircraft and then look at the radar screen and operate the controls at the same time. Now, that was hard enough in the daytime. Trying to do it at night when you can't see where you're going and you're looking for, kind of bomber targets in cloud and in the dark, and it was just too much. So what they decided to do was an emergency program to actually convert a two-seat trainer version of this aircraft into a rudimentary night fighter with the aerials again.
Okay, can you explain what's on the tip of this plane right here?
So those are antennae for a German airborne radar.
Wow.
Okay.
So, wow. I'm sorry. I have to pause at that and just really look at the rudimentary style of the radar systems and this is a German plane, right?
That's right. It's a Messerschmitt 262. It's a two-seater. It was originally built as a trainer aircraft, but in September 1944, the Germans decided that they needed a night fighter, a jet, because the RAF was sending Mosquito fighter bombers over every night to attack Berlin. Only maybe a handful of aircraft, 20 or 30 aircraft, but it was night after night, and that was in addition to the main bomber force of RAF aircraft, up to 1,000 aircraft at a time, which were bombing other cities. But it was such a problem for Berlin that they said they had to have these aircraft to do the night inceptions. Now, where it comes back to the Foo Fighters is that these aircraft were being reported by the night fighter crews, the American ones, but also by the RAF bomber crews. But these aircraft weren't in service when they were seeing them. They hadn't even been built for one thing. And then the second thing was, when they were built, they weren't put into action straight away because they didn't have enough trained pilots. And then when they were kept for the defense of Berlin. They weren't anywhere else in Germany. So they couldn't have been seen where where our pilots, the Americans and British, were seeing them. So that's where the kind of problem in terms of researching this topic lies. So there's one thing. Here's the next one. I'm just going to
wait. I'm sorry. Before you go to this picture, if you can go back to the next one, because I want to ask you one more question, because it's a technology question in particular. Because we hear a lot about, especially in this UFO topic, we hear a lot about the Bell, this German technology where they are developing anti-gravity kind of things, and I look at this. And I look at the radar system on the tip of this plane, and if you think for 1 second that the Germans had a anti-gravity machine, and this is the things they're putting on the front of their jets, you're reaching. I think it's a reach. Is that fair to say?
I would think so as well. I mean, there are schools of thought that thought the Germans were into all sorts of things, but actually, when you look at kind of how chaotic the German, even just going down to procurement of aircraft were. I mean, not just the design and the implementation of the designs, but actually just trying to get to that point. It was so chaotic and so mixed up in political infighting and all the rest of it that it was a surprise they got anything done.
Not to mention they were probably starting to lose the war at this point too.
Well, yeah, later on the war, these aircraft were flying off autobahns because a lot of the airfields had been blown up. So they were flying off stretches of motorway.
Let me ask you this. Sorry. Again, that's just my habit there. Let me ask you this. When I think of World War II planes, I think of propellers.
Yes, we would do.
This is a jet.
It is.
Was this the first jet style planes that were used in a war? Okay, yeah. So, can you give me a little bit of background about that?
It was the first operational jet fighter that the Germans used, but there were other aircraft that they used beforehand that they were developing, and they didn't get much beyond the sort of prototype stage. So
not even commercially these things were available, right?
No. No, they were always had a warlike purpose. There were never any commercial applications for jets because the first jet aircraft, in terms of the Germans, only flew just before the start of the war. So it flew at the end of August 1939, and they only built one of them, and then on that particular type. And then they came up with an idea for a jet fighter by the firm called Henkel. It was called the Henkel 280. But the aircraft didn't go very far. They built about 7 or 8 of the prototypes. Then they found they couldn't turn it into a viable jet fighter. And then they came up with this particular aircraft, or rather the single-seat version of this, the Mauser 262, and it was an incredibly good airframe. The engines were rubbish, but the airframe was excellent. And it did, if the war had gone on longer, or if it developed it earlier, or they managed to throw a bit more in terms of resources at it, it might have even been a war winner in terms of against American bombers. It was good.
I could tell you, if they could have perfected jet propulsion in that war, they would have been flying circles around those.
Sure, that's right.
Those propelled planes. So I've got a question here from the chat, and we actually got another question from Ryan Sprague. I'm so happy to see you here, Ryan. And by the way, Sprague, you've got the link, so if you want to join us later in the chat, please do. So we got a question from one of my favorite people on the planet, Strafe Wilson, and the reason why he is because this guy has been, from the moment I started the big phone home, this was the guy who reached out to me and was like, I'm putting together a Facebook page. I'm going to get you articles that are written. He's just doing all of this crazy legwork. And I hope to meet him one day because I got to buy him a night's worth of beers if he drinks. But his question is, why is the British government so impregnable when it comes to transparency?
That's a good question. I think it's inherent in the way they work. I think they've always had this long-standing view that if they don't need to release information, they don't. And I don't think they've ever been that open. And I think there was a resistance to even come up with the Freedom of Information Act, because that took a long time to come out as well. And I just think it's the way that the way they operate. They seem to continue the need to know aspect that it's a hangover from wartime. It's almost like an old boys network in so much as the information is theirs and they don't want to release it. And I think that's just the way they go on. I don't think there's any particular malice behind it. I think it's just ingrained in the way that our government and our civil service and our Ministry of Defense work.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. With this older information that you're researching in particular, have you found a hard time looking up these kinds of stories and going through government, or have you been going through government files to sort of get these pictures and things like that? Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
I've been going through what you can get a hold of. So in terms of the American side of things, there's 2 avenues. So you can go through the Air Force historical records from which is Maxwell Air Force Base, and they're great. All you do is you do a search for the relevant information you're after. You send them the details of the microfilm reels and all the rest of it, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, or however long it takes them to process the order, you get an email with a link to a Department of Defense website where you can just download the files. It's great. And in fact, I got a whole load of data dumps last night that they sent me. So that's brilliant. The search engine is impossible to use, however. You have to know exactly what you're looking for. It's not very user-friendly. That's not a criticism. It's just the way it is. So you do have to be very specific about what you're looking for. And you don't always get what you think you're going to get either. A lot of the information, you might ask for specifics, but what you get back is what they have. And a lot of it, because of the way that I allude to this in the article I wrote for the Debrief, a lot of the paper that was used in the war was pretty low grade, and it doesn't photocopy very well, so a lot of it's quite blurred and all the rest of it. It's just through the microfilm process. But then again, a lot of these things were archived in the 1970s, so that, they don't stand the test of time. In terms of the British records, we have the National Archives, and actually due to COVID, they've been pretty good. A lot of the things you have to pay for in terms of getting information from them in files, even digital files, but because of COVID, because they haven't had access to their reading rooms and their usual services to pay for, they've been letting you just download stuff for free. So if it's available digitally, you can download it. You just have to set up an account. And I've been downloading lots of RAF squadron files, all the usual stuff that you'd go through to look through the mission records, so you can find records of what potential Foo Fighter sightings. And there are lots of them, but they're very patchy. Again, something I referenced in the debrief article was that it was often down to the individual intelligence officers of a squadron as to how much information that would end up in the records anyway. So the default position for some intelligence officers would be, you've just been drinking,
Yeah.
Are you mad? Are you seeing things up there?
Well, I love that response is, well, you guys must have been drinking. Really? Well, why the fuck are we flying a plane? If you think we've been drinking, why are we here? Like, what kind of pilots are sitting there having a couple of beers before they go into maybe I can see maybe a pilot taking like a little, flask and taking a shot before he goes into the, into the intense part of things, just to calm himself down. But, to sit there to this idea that these guys are in a plane just having a party, drinking and getting stoned. Like, come on, that's crazy. So real quick, the Signal says, nice bug. Jesus, do I have to pay you guys for advertising my stuff?
Yeah, he does. Tell him he does.
Hope the check's in the mail, Dan.
Yeah, right. that'll be a $5, please, Dan.
So we got a question from Ryan Sprague, and then we'll continue with your presentation here. What does Graeme think of the 5 eyes and what they may or may not be sharing with all of the UAP task force stuff? Now, that's a phrase. I'm going to guess what 5 eyes is because I've never heard that. I'm assuming that's the 5 branches of military.
It's to do with the intelligence sharing apparatus between the Americans and the British, and possibly other nations as well. I don't know what the level of trust is now between the Americans and the British. It keeps, as far as I'm concerned, I think it keeps changing. And I think it might change between administrations. But then again, I'm not an insider, so I don't know. And this is just my personal opinion. But I'm not entirely sure that it might be as kind of as full as it used to be during the Cold War. I think it's a different game nowadays. I think when it was us against NATO against the Russians, I think it was a different time, and I think things might have been shared a bit more openly because everybody was on the same side. But now that that's over, if you like, I know it's sort of building up a bit at the moment, but I think there's a less probably maybe impetus to share stuff some openly if they don't have to. That's just my gut feeling. But maybe I'm just old and cynical. I don't know. But I'm trying to think if there's any reason why you would share a lot of stuff if you didn't really need to. And how leaky do you think the other side is? If you share something really vital, is it going to end up in a newspaper somewhere, or somebody going to leak it somewhere? Is it going to end up on WikiLeaks and all the rest of it? And I just think, is there so much sharing of this kind of information now? And I say that just might be me just being a bit snarky and a bit, a bit cynical, but that's just the way I feel about a lot of things. I don't think there's as much sharing as people would think there would like to be.
Well, going back to that snarky and cynical, you are the Mick West more open-minded cousin.
Apparently so. Yeah, I'm gonna get a T-shirt with that on.
All right. So, man, that's funny. Okay, so let's get into this next slide. And where we're going here. So this next picture was and take your time if you get
that's fine. So we're looking at reports that suggest that we're seeing particular types of aircraft, because they are, when you were talking about what information are you looking at. So I'm looking at intelligence files which do list a lot of these encounters, but they don't on the surface, they don't look like Foo Fighter encounters. But when you dig deeper into them, when you do this deep dive, if you like, that's the phrase, isn't it? That you see all these extra bits and pieces that come out. And it's like peeling an onion. The surface looks like something, but then when you go deeper and deeper, it just keeps unraveling. Yeah. So here's another aircraft that they said they were seeing. And you can see specific reports for them actually looking at these and saying they shot them down. So this is a rocket-propelled interceptor that the Germans came out with. This happens to be one of the prototypes, but they actually built a combat version of it. Now, this aircraft. Now, if you were talking about in the war about what you thought the aircraft were, and they were piston engine aircraft. Yeah. And did you think that the Germans had jets? Well, actually, they had rocket aircraft as well. Now, if I asked you what the fastest aircraft of World War II was, you probably wouldn't thought it was that.
Well, I would have said a missile. I probably would have said like a V2 rocket.
Well, this might as well have been a missile. Yeah. Because it was rocket powered. It was powered by 2 fuels that they weren't compatible. If you put them together, they exploded. One of the fuels, if you dipped your finger in it, it would turn white and start to burn.
Wow.
Because it would actually spontaneously combust on anything organic contacted with it.
Oh my God. That's who the hell would fly this thing? And I always, when you say something like that, I think to myself, okay, who was the guy that was like, hey, I got an idea. Let me take these two components that have nothing to do with each other. Oh, and by the way, one of them can internally combust if it touches your skin. Like,
and
that's
something else as well.
Insane.
It hasn't got an undercarriage either. It's got a skid, if you can see there.
Yeah.
It landed on a skid. It didn't have wheels when it came back into land.
Oh, hell no. Hell no.
So it took off.
Who's signing up to fly this thing, dude?
So this thing could touch 620 miles an hour. It could climb at 12,000 feet a minute.
Wow.
And it took off on a wheeled dolly, which was jettisoned after takeoff.
Huh. Wow.
So in 3 minutes, it was at the altitude of the bombers.
Wow. So
it only carried
impressive in that day.
Yeah. It only carried enough fuel for 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Because that's how much
7 minutes. Okay, and so what was, if you could tell me, what was the main focus and mission of a plane like this?
To shoot down your American bombers.
Wow. In 7 minutes.
So the idea was they took off. They had enough fuel to fly upwards through the bombers and shoot at one on the way up. They had enough fuel to circle round and power back down through the bombers on another firing pass. And if they were really good and they could conserve the fuel enough, they could probably come around for another pass for one more. And then the world's fastest aircraft turned into the world's fastest glider.
Right.
And they had to glide back to a landing, and they were really vulnerable then. But even on landing,
I mean, where are they going to land? Holy shit! Like, you're blowing my mind here a little bit. Like, that is crazy. That's like, I don't care what side you fight on. That is some of the bravest stuff I've ever heard. For you to get into a plane that you know is not coming back to where you took off from, and you're going to have to find some improvised place to land this thing. That's insane. Okay, so go on.
They operated them from grass strips. So they used to land. So the skid would actually drop down, and they would land on the skid. But half the time, the aircraft used to tip over on landing.
Yeah.
And of course, even though fuel had been exhausted, there would still be fuel sloshing around in the tanks, and it would come out. And sometimes they exploded on landing. Actually, some of the aircraft exploded anyway. There's stories of these things just simply exploding, sitting on the tarmac parked somewhere. Yeah, they were really dangerous. So, so they were designed to shoot down bombers, but actually they lost more aircraft in accidents than they did they shot down American bombers. So they were quite dangerous. Now, what I'm trying to get at with the Foo Fighters is that these aircraft were seen at night, but they couldn't have been because they were never operated at night. They were only ever flown through the day on combat missions. They were too dangerous to fly in the day, never mind the night. And actually, there's an autobiography by a test pilot for one of these, a guy called Manor Ziegler, and he wrote about him and a couple of his mates from the squadron were watching one night these RAF bombers flying over to attack wherever they were going. And the youngest of them said, we should take one of these comets up and shoot them down and teach them a lesson. And he said, look, if you do that, you're going to be spread eagled all over the countryside when you come into land, because you'll just break up, and go everywhere on landing, because you won't even be able to see where you're coming in. So you can imagine trying to fly one of these things at night. So the question is, what the hell were the bomber crew seeing? They were seeing some, and the actual the reports are of little delta-winged or kind of swept-back aircraft, but there's nothing in the repertoire of German aircraft or even missiles that fit this particular scenario. So what the hell were the bomber crews seeing? What were your night fighter crews seeing over Belgium and France and Western Germany?
The only thing I would push back on, if I were to have to answer that question, would be like, well, these planes were insanely dangerous to a point where they would just blow up on themselves sitting on the tarmac.
That's right.
So, I mean, for me, in my brain, I'm thinking, well, if you're the kind of nutball to climb into this thing and take off, who's the hell? Why aren't you the kind of nutball that would do it at night? You might as well. You might try it, but the I think to sort of emphasize your point is that, well, these things they definitely don't glow at night. If they did, it would just be the jet fume coming out of it, not the entire craft, right?
There was never any kind of flames came out the back of these, but it was a big white plume of rocket exhaust came out the back.
So you probably won't see that at night anyway.
No, in the daytime they were quite visible. And actually there are reports. There was a chap who wrote a book in 2007 about the Foo Fighters. It's called Strange Company, and some people might have read it. And there are reports in there. There's one particular report that I remember from that book, and it was from 1943, and an American bomber crew saw a long white plume coming out of an object. Now that was probably one of the original rocket comet prototypes being tested, because they were tested in the north of Germany, and that was where the sighting occurred. So that's probably what that was. But these were never flown at night, and the records sort of suggest that's the case. Right. And you might think that somebody was freelancing and took one up at night. No, that never happened. There's no records, none of the official histories, none of the autobiographies, none of the books about the comet, nothing ever suggests they were flown at night. So that's how you know.
When pilots, let's talk about stigma for a second and reporting these things. In World War II, when pilots were reporting these things, I mean, you had said that someone is suggesting these guys were drinking, but was the U.S. military or the RAF taking these reports seriously?
Well, this is something
or is it? I'm sorry to cut you off. Or is it sort of the same thing that we're dealing with today, where we've got, stories of the U.S. kid and all of these drones showing up over, flight pads and things like that. And these guys are afraid to report it because they don't want to be laughed at. And we've sort of painted ourselves into this corner where we're ignoring a lot of data because it's too weird to talk about, and that's just a crazy concept. But can you tell me a little bit about sort of the reporting of these things back then versus today?
I'll go to the present straight away. So you've got a mix of things at the moment. You've got people who are quite reticent, and they're quite, they just want to keep things hidden because they're frightened of their job or their career or their career in the military. So they don't report things. There are people who will report things, but then it'll just get knocked straight back. Oh, you're seeing things. We're not going to take that any further. And then of course you get people who do bring things forward and they come into the public eye. So I'm thinking about David Fravor. I'm thinking about the other F-18 pilots, and I'm thinking about the guy who's the crew who were flying that commercial jet over, it was in New Mexico,
American Airlines.
A while ago. Yeah, that's the one that saw the missile or whatever that was, so whatever that object was. So today we've got that kind of mix of people reporting but or not reporting, or reporting but not being knocked back. Now you had that at the time as well, because you had some squadrons where somebody reports something and you would get the adverse reaction. Oh, look, you're seeing things. It's combat fatigue, or are you drunk? Or look, you're not. Or they're German secret weapons, because that was another popular thing. Because they had no frame of reference. There was nothing like aliens or flying saucers there. Nobody had even considered the extraterrestrial possibilities, kind of thing. So that wasn't even on the radar. It was just you must be seeing a German serial weapon then. So if that was the case, and if that's what they thought they were going to take them seriously, because that was an intelligence kind of thing. But a lot of the time it was, no, we're not even bothering. And of course, it depended also on the mindset of the intelligence officers they were talking to. So it depended on which squadron or which unit they're in as to how seriously they were taken. So you can see in some reports when we know from other ways that there was something going on, like from a pilot's logbook. But then when you look at the actual historical record, i.e. what they call the operational record book from an RAF squadron, which lists every mission by every aircraft, and they are that detailed.
Yeah.
You can look at the records, and then you look at the night in question, and there's nothing. All you get is the takeoff time, the landing time, the bomb load, when they dropped it, if there was any contact with enemy night fighters, and that's about it, or any technical issues with the aircraft. But you won't even see the bits about the strange stuff. And then, of course, you look at a different unit on a different day, and there's a whole little bit about it. Yes, we saw this strange light following us, or there was a rocket went past us, because you see all this stuff in the records as well. So it's very patchy. The records are extremely, they're not consistent across the board. And I think that also goes back to the way that these things were reported in terms of just how the squadron records were written, not even just with the Foo Fighters, just with everything. So I think a lot of people they just want to do the least work possible in recording stuff. So you'll get some squadrons where you get very little information. You'll get ones where they just have a summary for each raid for the whole squadron, and then other ones you'll have mission reports for each aircraft that took part in the raid, and then some of them are quite patchy. And then you look at another squadron where they'll do the same, but you've got a lot of information from each one. So it's just a question of going through and picking out what you can. But who knows what's hidden with the other ones where they don't have so much information. Now the Americans seem to have a different mindset. Their records are much more detailed, and they're written in a much more informal style, especially the war diaries, because you can pull them out of the records as well. And I've looked at a lot of the night fighter war diaries from Europe, from France and Belgium when the Americans were based there in late '44, when this kind of narrative, this false narrative, as it turns out, of the Foo Fighters started. There's a lot of information in those unit war diaries, but they're much more informal. So they'll talk about what they felt and what they saw and all the rest of it, and that's quite illuminating. But it's certainly different from the RAF. They were much more formal, but also it was all over the place in terms of how much information was there.
Yeah. Well, we've got a question here, but before we get to Explorer Lab's question, if I can ask you real quick, maybe if you can give me one example of from an RAF versus the United States, is there anything that sticks out in your brain, any particular detail where you were just like, wow, that is just like very cool?
Well, I'll give you, I mean, I listed some in the article, but I've got a few full enough handy here, and I'll just read out a couple if you don't mind.
No, go for it.
Okay, so this is, and this also demonstrates that it wasn't a November 1944 start, because these are much earlier. So we've got an RAF, and these are actually probably counter what I've just said, because these are ones where they did actually provide a lot of information. So we've got there's a raid on Turin in northern Italy, and our bombers were actually flying over the Alps to attack the Fiat engine works in Turin in Italy. This is November 1942, and this is actually I'll quote from the report. And this report actually didn't just stay with the squadron; it went up the chain of command. So it actually was seen by many more high-ranking officers. And it says, report by the crew of 61 Squadron, Aircraft J, Captain Warrant Officer Lever, of object seen during raid on Turin, night of November 28, 2942. The object referred to above was seen by the entire crew of the above aircraft. They believed it to have been 200 to 300 feet in length, and its width was estimated at a fifth or a sixth of its length. The speed was estimated at 500 miles an hour, and it had 4 pairs of red lights spaced at equal distances along its body. These lights did not appear to be in any way like exhaust flames, as no trace was seen. The object kept a level course. The crew saw the object twice during the raid, and the first time was southwest of Turin, and the second time it was going up a valley in the Alps.
Wow.
So make of that what you will.
I mean, can you just, for me real quick, because that was, you threw a lot of information out there, but the thing that really struck me was the size of this object. 300 feet?
Now, bearing in mind, if you don't know what an object is, it's very difficult to estimate its size or its distance. So that's the first thing you've got to get past. But even so, what was something that didn't have wings? What didn't have engines?
Right.
So there's a parallel straight away with a Tic Tac.
Right.
Isn't there?
Yeah. Featureless, no exhaust plumes.
Something moving around without any visible means of propulsion. Yeah. Wow. So there's that. So here's another one. I'll just go to this one. This is the Bay of Biscay, again, November 1942. Now, this is not an RAF one. This is actually an American Army this is a US Army Air Forces aircraft. Now, at the time, the US Navy was supposed to be involved in anti-submarine aircraft missions, but they hadn't been able to send their aircraft to England to operate in concert with ours. So there were some US Army Air Force bomber squadrons that were supposed to be going on raids against Germany in occupied Europe, but they actually managed to get one of them to act in the anti-submarine role. And this was the one that was involved in this particular report. And this, you'll find, if you look at Len Stringfield, who was a noted researcher from the 50s and 60s, he had a very small newsletter going in 1955 called CRIFO. And if you look in one of the editions, you'll find this report. And what it says is CJJ, because he used just the initials, he didn't use the name of the crewman, was attached to a wing of an anti-submarine squadron whose unit was assigned to the duty in the Bay of Biscay. So that's off France. That's where the U-boats were coming out of the French bases and going into the North Atlantic. The tail gunner first sighted the UFO, because that's what they were calling in the 50s. Obviously, they didn't call that at the time. A strange craft without wings. Others, including the assistant engineer, confirmed the object, and the intercom became a jumbled mess of incoherent squawks as the spotters gave the pilot a detailed account. During this time, CJJ was in the ball turret, and by the time he ascended to the way stack, most of the crew were watching the thing. A technical sergeant, whose initials are just given as FMB, armed with a K-20 camera, was already shooting pictures. So bear that in mind. By this time, the UFO was flying behind us at 5 o'clock. Although it was difficult to determine its distance, the object, which appeared massive, soon gained altitude without visible means of propulsion. There's that phrase again. It was in view for 15 minutes. The object then finally executed a 180-degree turn and disappeared. Out of a number of exposures taken by the technical sergeant, only one with a filter showed the details. This perfect print became a matter for US and RAF intelligence. So where's that photograph?
Yeah. I was like, please tell me, Graeme, you have this photograph.
No, I don't.
I was hoping it was in your little presentation here.
I wish. Do you know what? I can't even find the records from the squadron. I know which squadron it is. I even know the name of the technical sergeant. I don't want to give it out because the records at the time was quite specific in that the witness didn't want to be identified, and I respect that. But I do know who. I don't know who he is, but I certainly know who the crewman with the camera was. He died actually 3 months later on another raid. So, but the thing is though, those records I can't find. They may be located somewhere else. It's a question of maybe just coming across them. But I certainly haven't found them yet. But I do know the squadron was there. I know where it was based, and I know certain details. So that much is true. And I know they were operating over the area at the time. And in fact, the squadron had just turned up from America about a week beforehand, so it was the first missions they were flying. But that's as much as I can get. Yeah. But it's certainly an interesting report. And again, there's that phrase, the without visible means of propulsion sort of thing. So you just wonder what the hell was going on back then.
Yeah, especially what year was that second report you gave?
So they were both 1942. No, 42.
42.
Yeah,
wow,
really early.
Really early. Okay, so we got a question here from Explorer Lab, and I don't know if sort of the last two things you read maybe answer this question, and if not, I think we'll definitely get into one of the more interesting stories that's in the article here. But the question is, were Foo Fighters ever intercepted? Did they react to the interception? The U.S. Air Material Command's 1949 Project Saucer report elude the question by citing individual examples.
Yes, so if you turn about initiating combat, they were certainly trying to get them off their tail, because most of the time these things were either creeping up on them or just sitting off their tails, especially the night fighter crews, the American night fighter crews who were encountering these things, that they would just follow them. And then the standard tactic, if you had something on your tail, you would think it was a night fighter. A German night fighter. So the last thing you'd want is for it to still sit there. So you'd throw your aircraft into a violent series of evasive maneuvers. This was something that they were taught to do, and this was also the same for the American for the RAF bomber crews. If you had something coming up on your tail, the last thing you wanted to do was for it to sit there so it could open fire on you. So you threw your aircraft. The RAF called it a corkscrew. It was a maneuver basically where you turned it on your side and you dived, and then you climbed in a different direction. Now, the Americans had something similar. They called it something different, but it was essentially the same maneuver. Now, a lot of the times the reports are that these maneuvers were carried out, but whatever these things were, they managed to stay with the aircraft. And there's reports of them either being on their tails throughout these maneuvers or on their wingtips throughout these maneuvers. Now, imagine something that can still do that. Now, if you're flying at night, it's very hard to keep station with another aircraft because you can hardly see them. And you can imagine, why would a Luftwaffe night fighter sit on a tail and just follow an aircraft? Why would it try and shoot it down? And this is the thing with these Foo Fighters. They didn't open fire when they could. So there's another thing as to why you look at it and you think, well, if it's
could have been the enemy,
why would it be an enemy when they weren't going to open fire? So there's another thing, you see.
Yeah.
So,
well, before we get on to the next thing, I just want to say, hello to everyone in the chat. First of all, I love this comment right here. Alien Girl sent me. I love that. Welcome, Bobby. I'm so happy you found the show. Welcome, Rusty, Gerald, everyone, Grandmaster, everyone who's in the chat so far. So with that last question in mind, what I really wanted to talk about, because I thought it was the moment in the article I was like, what? And I had to read it again. And this is why I recommend, this is why I'm talking to you, this is why you guys should go read this article, because it might answer some of these questions that you have. You talked about that exact instance where you had a tail gunner in a plane and a ball of light shows up behind them, and they immediately go into these maneuvers and they start opening fire because they don't want to die, essentially. Can you tell us about this story and exactly what happened and what happened? I really loved sort of the shock that one of the people on the plane had, to a point where it took them a good 24 hours to really recover from the mental anguish that this experience put on him. So
okay, so that's actually two different stories there.
Okay, so, two different. Okay, so there you go. I'm confusing things. See, this is why I'm happy you're here.
No, it's fine. You've got elements of the first and the last examples that I had in the article. So the first one is March 1942. So that's really early, and that's only a month after what some people might know as the so-called Battle of Los Angeles, where an object that was supposed to have flown over Los Angeles was engaged by your anti-aircraft defenses, and they fired 1,400 shells at it, and it still didn't bring it down.
And by the way, people died from the shrapnel of those shells.
They did. That's right. There were
a lot of heart attacks were had during that night too. So that's a big deal, and a lot of people kind of either haven't heard of it or kind of overlook it as, oh, well, it's just an old case, we don't need to pay attention to it. But that is an intense moment in American history. So sorry to cut you off, but I just wanted to touch on that.
No, that's fine. So this is only a month after that, and this is over the Ruhr Valley in Germany, in Western Germany. This is quite an industrial area, but that was quite a frequent place where the RAF were bombing, because it was the main industrial heartland of Germany. Very early in 1942. Anyway, this was a Polish aircraft. Well, it was an RAF aircraft, but it was crewed by Polish people who had escaped Poland and then gone through Czechoslovakia, and then they'd served in France, and then when France fell, they'd finally come across to the UK. So there were quite a few Polish units on the RAF where there were just Polish people serving, and this happened to be one of their squadrons, and they were flying Wellington bombers, and they were coming back from the raid, and the tail gunner basically shouted a warning to the pilots saying, "We've got something coming up behind us. It's just, a light." Now, at the time, if it was a light, they would think it was a night fighter. Most night fighters didn't really have light showing, because why would you actually show a light so somebody can see you coming at you?
Right.
Yeah. You would think, why would you do it? But anyway, this light was coming towards them. So he shouts the warning. And the first thing you would do was just think it was a night fighter. It was instinctive. There was no thinking about it. No, we'll wait to see what it is. It was just, bang. You just put the aircraft into a violent series of maneuvers, and that's it. Now, this thing still followed them. So, and then, of course, the standard procedure would be, if it got within firing range, theoretically, you could hit a target at 1,000 yards, but they would wait until they got much closer, because at 1,000 yards, you weren't likely to hit anything worthwhile. So they waited to get closer. Now, it actually did get closer. It got to within 250, 200 yards or so, according to the pilot who, after the war, mentioned this. And so they're going to open fire. And the tail guns on a Wellington, there was only two guns on gun turrets on a Wellington. There was a front turret and a rear turret. There was no mid-upper turret. Some of the bigger later bombers, the RAF, had a third turret, and of course the American bombers had turrets on above and also below, but these were much earlier RAF bombers. So anyway, the tail gunner opens up. He says that the projectiles, because they were using tracer ammunition. Now, tracer isn't just bullets; it's actually incendiaries. The little flares that just you can see them, so you can see where your bullets are going, and that's how That's why they use tracer. So he was watching these just go into the object, whatever it was. It resolved itself into a kind of ball of fire, like a luminous object.
Yeah.
And nothing was happening.
Can you tell me how big those rounds were?
Well, they're just standard bullets. So it was there were 0.303 inch bullets.
Yeah.
That was the caliber of the weapon. So they were just machine gun bullets, basically.
Yeah.
That's what they carried. They didn't carry cannon. They were always machine gun bullets. So, but they were firing them, and of course they were firing them in short bursts, but they were still firing them, and nothing was happening. So this thing then moved around to the wingtip of the aircraft. And I can't remember, they don't really have any kind of distance because, again, a light at nighttime, you can't really tell until you know what it is. You can't say how far away it is or how big it is. But it sat some distance off their wingtip. So it was completely unaffected by the bullets. But then the nose turret gunner could turn his turret and fire at it as well. And they did. Both turrets were firing at this object and nothing was happening. And then it moved around to the front of the aircraft and took a position some distance in front and just sat there. As they were flying along, it was sitting, a distance in front of them and maintaining the same separation. And then all of a sudden, it just vanished. It just shot off and vanished.
That's crazy. And so what happened when they landed?
Well, so they landed and they talked to when a crew landed, this was standard practice, even if nothing happened, you would get debriefed by the intelligence officer. You would wait around on a table, and then your turn would be called, and you would go and talk to this lieutenant or lieutenant, whoever it was, and they would ask you a series of questions. It would be, what time did you take off? Did you drop your bombs on target? Did you see anything else in the mission? Did you notice any flak defenses? Were there any night fighters around? All that kind of stuff. Right. And that was their opportunity to tell people, and that's what they did. So the entire crew would have seen it. And of course, the information was given to the intelligence officer, and that was the thing that they said to them: "Were you drinking?" Yeah, exactly. But the Polish pilot had actually spoke to one of his colleagues who was in an aircraft behind them, and apparently, according to the pilot of the aircraft who had the encounter, they also had a similar encounter, but they refused to mention it to the intelligence staff.
Wow. Let me ask you this. How did this particular story, the pilots and the people on the plane that were involved, has anyone ever have they ever spoken publicly about this?
Yeah, they have. Yeah.
Okay.
So the information came out. The first, I've looked at, because a lot of these stories, I've tried to go into the actual, the origins of these stories to find out where especially when they're not in the official records. Because actually, if you look in the official records of the particular squadron on that night, there's no mention of it. So that comes back to what I said before about these patchy reporting. But anyway, if you look at the public statements made by the pilot, it actually appears first as a third-party report in an issue of Flying Saucer Review in 1962, I think it is. So it's a brief mention. It's only a paragraph in length, and it's at the end of an article called Foo Fighters. But the emphasis of the report is to do with the November 1944 sightings onwards from the American point of view. It doesn't really mention much about the RAF experience, but right at the end, there's actually a report from somebody in Vancouver. It was a lady in Vancouver who must have been interested and who was like a stringer for reports and would send reports to FSR. And this report ended up in the magazine in 1962 about a Polish pilot who saw this object behind them. And then when you go a bit deeper into it, there was actually some people that actually contacted this pilot long after the war, and he'd given a couple of interviews to various people who had contacted him about this. And that's when the details had come out about how he'd had this experience and how his gunners had fired at this object. One of his gunners, funnily enough, was actually turned out to be a long distance sailor in the post-war period. He was actually a Polish nobility, funnily enough, but obviously he'd had to escape Poland because of the Germans, and he didn't go back after the war because of the communists, and because he was nobility. Anyway, he became a long-distance sailor, and he was lost in what they call the Bermuda Triangle. So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot said about the Bermuda Triangle, but it's an interesting story. Let's put it that way.
No, that is very interesting. Okay, so we got a couple of questions. Well, the first one here is from Christopher Plain. I thought this was pretty good.
Hello, Chris.
Were Foo Fighters all described as balls of light, or were there different form factors?
Okay, so there were different names. The RAF, bearing in mind the name Foo Fighter was coined by an American crewman in November 1944, and it was based off a cartoon strip that was popular at the time. And it was a guy called, the cartoon strip was called Smokey Stover, and it was about some comedic firefighter who had a fire engine called the Foo-mobile. And it was a play on words between the French word for fire, which is fou, but also just all these comedic elements. And it was a popular thing that the crews read. And this particular crewman just called it Foo Fighters. You actually called them something else, but that's not printable. And so they sanitized the first word. You can work out what the word is, but when the press got a hold of it, they didn't use the first word.
Yeah.
So
wait, because this is not a censored show, they were calling them fuck fighters.
Fucking Foo Fighters. That's what he called them.
Fucking Foo Fighters. Okay,
yeah,
I was like,
that's what he called. Yeah,
they were calling them fuck fighters.
Okay.
What kind of name is that?
But then when
fucking Foo Fighters. Got it.
Yeah, so it was sanitized for the press, and that's where the name sticks from.
Got it.
Okay, so that was a name that the Americans used, but also beforehand they were still seeing them as well. Now, because they had no frame of reference, everything they saw, they were conditioned that they were going to see jets or missiles, because, well, what else could they have been? And you've got to put yourself back in the mindset of the people at the time to try and work out why things were called what they were. So they were called jets, they were called rockets, they were called meteors, and that was on both sides, the Americans and the British. But the British also had two other names for them, because our fighter pilots, our night fighter pilots, were seeing them reasonably regularly, especially over Italy and North Africa in 1943. And they called them the Thing. That was one name they called, but also the Light. Now, if you look at, this is the article that you're talking about here, but actually, if you look at Shadows of Your Mind magazine that Dave Partridge does, UAP Media UK, in his latest issue, I wrote something about an encounter that happened in December 1943, another Foo Fighter sighting, but one that was involved with what they called the Light, and it's called Dogfight with the Light. So again, that's another parallel between dogfights from F-18s and Tic Tacs to back then dogfights with mystery lights, objects, call them what you want.
Yeah. Well,
so
I can tell you,
that's what they call them then.
You know what I love about the term fucking Foo Fighters?
Yeah.
Is that in that phrase, it very quickly tells you how frustrated that pilot was.
They were frightened, actually, more than frustrated.
You know, like, I think to me, that's an important detail that I think people should know. They were calling them fucking Foo Fighters because to me that says these things were frustrating them. They couldn't, they couldn't, I mean, maybe I'm just taking leaps here that I shouldn't, but in my brain, if a pilot is saying that, that means that he is confounded, confused, and frustrated that he can't fly, keep up, or outmaneuver this thing, and he's supposed to be sitting in the, you know, at the time, the world's most sophisticated plane.
Yeah, well, that's very true. So, I mean, just to go back to Chris's question there, those were the names that they called them. They called them a variety of things, and that changed as the war went on. But yes, they were frustrated, they were scared. So if you can imagine, if your training leads you up to dealing with things you know about, so conventional piston engine German night fighters, or maybe even jets, but then you've got something else like a ball of light that follows you around that you can't shake, you can't shoot down, but doesn't do anything else. It doesn't commit any hostile acts.
Yeah,
it is going to rattle you. And one of the big things was, operational efficiency, that they had to make sure that the crews were well, they were healthy, they were fit, but also they were fit of mind to carry out their missions. Now, if you've got something that's mucking about with them, playing tricks on them, then that's going to reduce the efficiency. And of course, there was a lot of things going on from high command that they weren't happy. Once the information got out and got to more senior levels, they were asking about what was going on, because for one, just as a basic kind of thing, it was interfering with the way that they were operating the missions, because it was a distraction, if nothing else. And you don't want distractions when you're fighting a war.
Right. Well, you're talking about mental, making sure they're in good mental health. Can you talk a little bit about that one crewman who took, they said he was breathing heavy for 24 full hours after
sucking wind for 24 hours, it's called. Yeah.
Quote, sucking wind for 24 hours. So he was doing this.
Yeah.
For 24 hours after encountering one of these things.
But the thing is, you see, that was an October 1944 sighting, and they'd been seeing them for a few weeks before that.
Yeah.
And that was probably just one of the latest of the sightings. And not everybody had seen them, but sooner or later they did.
Yeah.
And then it got to the point where they were sending up war correspondents. From like Stars and Stripes were going up in the aircraft, and one of them saw them on Christmas Eve 1944, and it was a ball of light that followed their aircraft. And,
wow.
And of course, the correspondent couldn't put the stuff into Stars and Stripes straight away.
Right.
He did it. So he did later on, but at the time they couldn't, because they couldn't use information about the unit and about where they were seeing it and all, because they still thought they were German Streeter weapons. So.
Wow.
I'm just going to take a minute, if you don't mind.
Take it.
The last pictures I was showing you about rocket-powered aircraft.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
So you see the
look at this thing. Holy cow!
So you see the shape of the wing of the comet that I showed the picture of before.
Mm-hmm.
This was a missile that the same company were building, which looked like a miniature version of that particular rocket-powered aircraft. And this was a surface-to-air missile. It was never put into operation. They had problems with it, not least for the guidance system. So there's the thing, if you're going to follow an aircraft around as a ball of light, you need some kind of guidance system that can follow something and can track it. They didn't have that kind of sophisticated technology. They had trouble even just with the rocket motors. This thing had 4 disposable boosters, but it also had a liquid-fueled engine, which was a sustainer motor to get it up to altitude. And they ran out of rocket motors for testing these because they didn't have enough supplies and they were breaking down. So they kept launching them just with the solid-fueled boosters. And that only got the missiles so far in the air. So this was another thing that you think, if you look at it, that might have been the reason what they were seeing. But actually, no, because this was never successful. And actually, the project was terminated long before it even got into service. So there's one. And then you go into some of the others. Mm-hmm. This was a miniature V2 missile. It was called Wasserfall. And they experimented with this. This was another liquid-fueled surface-to-air missile. And if you look from the outside, and if you're kind of Mick West debunker, and you're trying to look for things, it might be this, it might be that. And I have gone through all these things as well to try and see, could the Foo Fighters be anything that you could explain away as? And I've gone through the entire gamut of German secret weapons that I'm aware of. And bear in mind, I've been looking at this subject for 50 years nearly, not quite 50 years, but getting on for that. And I can't find what they are. I can't explain them away.
Is it safe to say that these older cases, especially from World War II and World War I, might even be more useful than some of the stuff we get today?
There's certainly parallels between them. I don't know how useful they are, because obviously we're looking back to 75 years and more.
Yeah.
And
the only reason why I say that is because for today, anytime we get a new video or new this or new that, there are a billion different cameras out there. There are a billion different ways to fool and sort of create images, that fit narratives. Whereas in 1947, there was none of that.
Well, that's very true. So you're overwhelmed with information now, and I've had this argument with people before that we constantly clamor for more details, more videos, and then when we get them, we're not happy.
Right. Well, we talk about this all the time. Like, anytime we get a crystal clear video, we're like CGI. And then when a video doesn't look good enough, we're like, this is total garbage. Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword. You can't please. No one's ever going to be pleased. And that's why I hate video and pictures. Not hate it. I do like them. I think they're the sexiest part of this whole topic. But anytime they come out, I always have to cautious. I have to remind myself, don't get excited about this. Yeah. Wait for more information, because this is 2021 and the internet's a really weird place. So, that's what kind of sucks about the data that comes now. Whereas if this is 1947, I'm not going to, there are going to be a lot less excuses, especially as you said, when you run through the gamut of the things that they could have possibly been. And they're definitely not what we've got here on screen. What the hell are we dealing with?
Yeah, so there's a whole load of things that the Germans were experimenting with. I mean, that's on record, but nothing fits the profile. I mean, this is an early air-to-air missile. This was wire guided, and it was designed to be launched from a fighter aircraft, and they did actually build them. They had something, 600 or 700 of the actual bodies ready, but the actual rocket motors, the factory that was building them was bombed in the beginning of 1945, so they couldn't put them into operation. But that would have been a very, very useful weapon. But again, it's not nowhere near the things that the Foo Fighters could have done. And then now the only thing that almost might be, and this is for some of the reports that I've been finding out of the Balkans from 1944, and once I've gone in deep into the RAF archives, I've found a whole load of rocket reports from Allied bombers flying over the likes of Hungary and Romania from bases in Italy in 1944, and there's a lot of reports of rockets being flying past aircraft. Now, there is a specific weapon. This is an air-to-air rocket mortar that was used against American daylight bombers in 1943 and onwards, but it was never used at night. Again, for the same reason, that it was incredibly difficult to aim and fire during the day. So you couldn't use it at night because you couldn't even, aiming stuff at night was really difficult. And if you notice, I don't know if you notice on the right-hand picture here, you'll see the tube, it's actually inclined. So they never fired it in a straight line. The pilot had to be really kind of almost guess about how far away he was from a bomber, and because it went in a kind of arcing flight towards its target. And actually they missed quite a lot with these things as well, but when they hit a bomber, they were spectacular. This thing is basically a converted ground launched rocket artillery shell that the Germans actually used on the Eastern Front, called the Moaning Mini, and they adapted it for air-to-air use. And these were quite effective when they worked, but they didn't work that often. Now, these, again, I've even asked experts in Luftwaffe aircraft on various forums and all the rest of it, and I can't find, and they can't find, any use of this at night. But things that possibly could have resembled this were being used. But then again, the fighters that were based out there didn't even have these things fitted. So again, you keep coming across these roadblocks. I've been trying to chase down kind of explanations, because I'd love to find something that says, "Oh yeah, can you imagine how famous that would be if I thought, yeah, I've solved the Foo Fighters."
No, everybody would be. I don't think I'd be first on your list anyway to do interviews.
I'm not that arrogant, but what I mean is that if you did find something, I'd want to tell people, because you do want to solve things. I know we're in this to try and find the explanation, but actually I'm in this to try and find where the truth takes me. And I'm like that with the UFO subject. If it turns out to be something mundane, I might not be too happy, but I'll certainly be satisfied that I've got an explanation. And this is what I've tried to do with this. I've tried to look for things that fit the profile, and I still can't find anything.
Right.
Well, now, you were talking about photographs before, so I'll finish this if you don't mind, and then we'll.
No, go for it. I love it.
Photographic evidence. There isn't any. Believe me, there's not. I've looked. Other people have looked, and every picture that you see has been doctored in some way, or it's a defect on the film or something like that. And most of the time, you can't even work out where the aircraft are. Being an aircraft enthusiast, I can tell you what aircraft are being shown in pictures, but very rarely can you get a sense of where, when, or what.
Right.
The only reason why I know this picture is the 384th is because of the tail markings, the P in a triangle. That's the 384th bomb group. They were based in England. So that's the only reason I know there. I can't even tell you where that picture was taken, because there's no context.
There's just not enough information.
There's not. And those two lights, well, I'm looking for the original photograph, because I bet when I find it, those aren't on the original image. So then you've got this, and now obviously this was in the Debrief article, because this is the picture that goes everywhere. You see this time and time again. And funny enough, I've seen this reported as being German fighters, American fighters, British fighters, but actually they're Japanese. The Tawakashi Kai-36 Idas, and they're Army cooperation aircraft from, and they were mostly based in China in 1939 and 1940. So they don't even fit the profile.
Right.
The Foo Fighters were seen in the Pacific but they were seen a lot later. There were sporadic reports earlier in the war, but they're mostly concentrated around 1944, 1945. But these aircraft wouldn't have been around then.
Right.
They were too early in the war.
Yeah, and it's just a different part of the world, I'm assuming, Yeah.
But those blobs on that photograph could be almost anything. There could be defects in the film. There could be lights from a distance. It's really bad film. It's a blow up as well. Nobody knows what that is.
You probably don't even know what kind of camera it was.
Exactly. And we've got no idea of the unit or where they were. There's no support information about who took them, the context, anything.
Now, let me ask you this. I'm sorry, go back to that last picture, because maybe there's a way that I don't know if you've tried this. I mean, we know the kind of plane it is, right?
Yes.
Okay. So is there any camera systems that were around when this plane was made that might have been able to been attached to something like this? The reason why I ask is, maybe we can get a hold of those cameras and someone can try and recreate something similar to this to see if we get effects like that. Who knows?
Mick West can do it in his backyard with a model and a seat. No, well, basically, it was somebody in another aircraft flying along by just sticking a camera out of a window. That would be all it would be. And as to which camera it would be, who knows?
Yeah, could be anything. Okay. Yeah. Well, because I was thinking maybe some of these planes had military issued camera systems,
gun cameras,
that maybe they maybe it was like, I'm thinking of like, if you guys ever see something weird, there's a camera here in this glove box, you could pop it out and use it. I don't know, that's why I'm asking. Okay, so we got some things here in the comments. I just want to say, Gerald said, hey guys, sorry I'm late. Just want to say, never apologize on the show. No one ever, please. The word sorry, just take it out of your lexicon when coming to this show. Don't ever be sorry for being late. Just ring the bell, and that way you'll never be late. But the beautiful thing about 2021 is even if you're late, you can go back and watch it at your leisure. So no apologies here. Brandy had a question here, but of course this is speculation, but I figured I'd ask it anyway because she's a big fan of the show. She asked, what does he, Graeme, think the purpose of the Foo Fighters were? If you had to take a guess.
Do you know? I have no idea, because it's one of those things that we can't get into the mindset of what, who, whatever they are. We don't even know that.
Right.
We have no idea. We don't even know whether they were German secret weapons, because if they were, there's no supporting evidence. There's nothing in the records about them. People have suggested things, and I might go into that a bit later on if you want to. I can get into that. But really, we're no further forward. It's like, again, that's a parallel that I was trying to draw in the article, about the names of the Foo Fighters. They're still with us. It's something that we don't understand. We can't get a grip on. We've got ideas about, but actually we're no further forward than we were back then about what they are. These things have been with us. The names change. The capabilities might go a bit. They might be a bit faster nowadays. Back then, they could do 500, 1,000 miles an hour, whatever. They could be 200 or 300 foot long. Nowadays, they can drop from 89,000 feet to 500 feet in a second. And run rings around an F-15. So the kind of step change in performance might have gone up, but the fact that we have no idea what they were, that's not changed. I'm really disappointed in the way that we're no further forward, but I'm not surprised, I'm afraid.
No, well, you can't be surprised in this, and I really respect the answer you just gave. You don't know, and that's okay.
I don't know.
That's okay.
My default position on everything. I don't know.
Well, I always tell people in this field, it's okay not to know, and it's okay to be wrong. You're allowed to be wrong when it comes to UFOs, because the information changes real fast, and the bottom line is nobody knows. So if somebody says something and it happens to be wrong, just as long as they come out and they say, hey, by the way, we messed this up, here's the correction, let's move forward. But if they, the only time I don't like it is if you're wrong, you dig in your heels and you keep spitting this story as if it's fact, and it's not.
Go back to the time. If you go back to the time in question and you look at the intelligence reports and what the crew thought at the time, they were of the impression that they were German secret weapons. They had no idea of what their purpose were, because they weren't committing hostile acts. But that was what the consensus was. Now, that's a great place to start from, because it is. I mean, at the time, bearing in mind they had no concept of possible, extraterrestrial or ultra-terrestrial or whatever kind of, visiting. They they had no frame of reference beyond what they could see and what they could envisage, which would be German secret weapons. So you can't blame them for that kind of conclusion. But then when you look closely at what German secret weapons were around it and what was even on the drawing board, then that's when it comes up short, and that's when you can't then reconcile what was being seen against what existed. And that's what I'm trying to get in the book. So the people who have looked at the Foo Fighters beforehand and who have written about it, they've written about it from my opinion, at least, as from a UFO perspective. But they haven't necessarily dug deep into the possible causes and why those causes can't be, why those explanations can't be attributed to the Foo Fighters. And that's what I'm trying to do. So my book does go into a lot of the technology and try and put it in the context of the time as to why these things couldn't be what they said they were.
Chris has got a good question here. Has he seen any Nazi records of Foo Fighters?
There's a good one. The German records are really patchy when you get beyond a certain date in 1944. It wasn't so much of the fact they were destroying them because of specific reasons. They were just destroying things wholesale. So there are huge gaps in the record. However, if you go back to the jet fighters, there are records, fun enough, for their missions. So there's ways that we can look at things that have been put forward as explanations, and that's when we can rule them out. So the German jet fighter unit that actually did exist, the night fighter unit, I have actually the information about their missions, so I know I can match them against the records where they said they saw these things, because obviously they didn't. So that's how I know when they existed, from the dates they existed. So that's how I know that the Americans said they were seeing them, but they didn't. In terms of Foo Fighter specific records, as in mystery objects, now there are stories. And if you go as deep as looking into French language publications from the 1960s and 1970s, you will see these stories. And I've looked at these kind of things. There are stories coming out of Eastern Europe, not just after the fall of the Soviet Union, when a lot of information came out which may or may not be reliable, but certainly things even before that. There's a book, which I actually have behind me, which is called UFOs from Behind the Iron Curtain, and it was written as long ago as 1974. Now that actually
show us the cover. Show us the cover here.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Just pop it up onto the camera.
Okay, okay, right. Yeah, got it. Yeah, cool. So that's that. So yeah, my library. So yeah, so you can find stories there. Now, tracking down the more information to try and verify them, that's almost impossible, because the stories I've found from the German perspective don't hold water.
Yeah.
There's a story about a sighting in March 1942 up in the north of Norway that involves a German fighter pilot who came across effectively a 300-foot long airship. It's not really an airship, but that's how it's been described in some kind of comments on the case. I've done some digging into it, and I've done some digging into the kind of possibilities up there, and I've come to the conclusion it's a hoax. For a variety of reasons I won't get into right now, but I'm not the first to actually have come up with that conclusion. There's some Norwegian researchers have come to that as well, and some other people. And then there's some other stories about various fighter pilots, German fighter pilots, who have seen these things. Again, they don't hold water. There's also a story which originated some years ago in a French language book, which was then picked up by a whole load of other books, including Tim Good, who published it, about a German organization called Sonderbureau 13, which was effectively a clearinghouse for strange aircraft reports that were supposed to have existed during the war years. Now, Tim Good did actually say that it was supposed to be a hoax, and it was. It was actually a hoax on behalf of a French author who included it to try and see whether people would copy his work. Now, that information was buried away in French language magazines because he admitted to the hoax in the 1980s, but because it was in a very small French language publication, an interview with him, a guy called Henri Durand, That wasn't his real name; that was just his pen name. But he then admitted to the fact that he just made it up. But this story is perpetuated in books. You'll also see, if you look on websites about Foo Fighters and about Nazi flying saucers, because they were supposed to exist. Let's not go there at the moment. That's a subject for another day.
We went there and it's done.
It's a story for another day, believe me, because that'll take up another couple of hours if you want to talk about that.
We'll have you back for sure.
Okay, fair enough. Actually, I do touch on that in the book as well, because it's part and parcel of the Foo Fighters. Actually, it does. There are links. And because an Italian author in the late 1960s came up with two hitherto unknown German secret weapons that he claimed were actually the Foo Fighters.
Right.
But we'll go there some other day. So the German records don't substantiate the sightings from their point of view. There aren't any, but that's not to say that there aren't any buried away, since I've never come across any, and nobody else really has. And the stories that exist don't have much in the way of details that you can check. They don't have pilots' names, with one notable exception, which I've been the one that I mentioned from Norway, which I've been able to sort of prove as a hoax. And the others just mention types of aircraft, sort of locations, vague dates. Nothing that you can really go into. I've done my best in terms of looking at them, but I'm not convinced that the Germans either took it seriously or had a reporting kind of network that we and you guys did in terms of being able to come up with some rational explanations. Maybe they did, and I've just not come across it yet. I could be wrong. But I've not, but other people haven't either. I have put some feelers out for people who have written about the German night fighter experience, but I haven't had anything substantial back yet. So I'm still waiting to see whether that occurs. And if anybody out there has information along those lines, please, I'd love to see it. Or if anybody knows anybody who has a German author friend who's interested in the subject of World War II night fighters, who can get in touch with me.
Hit up Graeme.
I'd love to speak to them as well.
Hit them up if you got the info.
Hey, while I'm on, if anybody's got relatives who saw Foo Fighters in the war, I'm happy to talk to them as well. So
that would be cool.
That kind of thing. So
so
the records don't exist.
Yeah, good. That was a wonderful question, and I think it actually spawned two more. One question that made me think of, and that is for the folks watching the show who are interested in researching things like this, and possibly maybe they want to write a book. When you say I started looking into it, I started digging into it. Where can you tell me? You don't have to tell me your entire process, but I am curious to know, where do you go first? Like, where do you start looking first? Do you hit up a library? Do you go on the internet? Do you start reading the shelf of books you got behind there? Like, where's some of your favorite places to look for stuff like this?
My first encounter with the kind of the term Foo Fighters wasn't Dave Grohl's band. It was a long time before that. So a long time before 1994. It was just a reference to them in a book that I'd read back in the 1980s, and it sort of intrigued me, because obviously when I was younger and I was reading books on UFOs when I was like from 9 years on. Back in those days, I don't know what everybody else does, but I'm like a sponge. Everything. If it's in a book, it must be true, because that's how you're conditioned when you're at school. You're reading history books and textbooks. Everything you read is true. So if I'm reading a UFO book when I'm 9 or 10 or whatever, then obviously I'm soaking it up and I'm believing it. And there was something about UFO. There was something that mentioned these American night fighter pilots who had seen these strange balls of light, and it wasn't much in the way of detail. I can't even remember which book it was now, but it was enough for me to go, hold on, I've been reading about UFOs and that they're aliens, and now somebody is telling me that there could be German secret weapons. So that really got me thinking, even back then. And this is possibly when I was probably a teenager, and then when I must have been 16, I would be 16 years old, and I bought a book on German jet aircraft, and there are such books. I mean, have you got your picture up again? I'll even show you.
Yeah. Lay it
I
out.
bought this in 1982. It's still on my shelf.
Oh, cool. Hold it closer. Hold it closer.
Okay, and I'll open it at the page that really hit me. Okay.
Yeah.
So at the back of the book is this really, really weird thing. How about that?
I'm gonna blow you up here. Hold on a second. Oh wait, oh, I took you off. Hold it up. Hold it up. Wow. Okay.
What does that say to you?
Yeah, that says that somebody was working on something.
Yeah. Well, the jury's out on that. Let's put it that way. But there's enough information out there that some people somewhere thought there was something going on. Now, actually, I don't want to get too much into it, but it turns out there's a lot of people just making spurious claims with no evidence to back it up. And I'm sure some people might have a different opinion, but I'm happy to debate that with them whenever they want. But and that got me thinking, because it was a case of, well, hold on. I've read about these Foo Fighters that are German secret weapons, and now the Germans are supposed to be building flying saucers. So it turns your world upside down. But back then I didn't have the time and the kind of the luxury of the internet to be able to do much about it. I didn't have access to a huge kind of reservoir of information. My local library in Newcastle, where I lived at the time, it didn't have that many books about UFOs, never mind Foo Fighters. I could count them on the fingers of no hands. But I was interested in the war. I was interested in German aircraft, and that has been a long-standing interest in German secret weapons and German tanks and all the rest of it. It's been a big thing in my life. If you look at my library, and not just this side, but around the books I've got in storage in the loft and all the rest of it, I've got a huge kind of library on this kind of stuff. So the two things coincided for me: the UFOs and the war. And obviously, when the internet came up, these things popped up occasionally. There wasn't much more information that was beyond the books, because people still thought that the Foo Fighter experience had started at the end of 1944 with the Americans seeing them. And then just bit by bit, I picked up a little bit more information by reading things like Flying Saucer Review and these other newsletters and all the rest of it. And it just got me thinking. And then obviously, like some years ago, I thought about writing, and then I wrote that book about my trip to Siberia that I did back in '92. And then after I had that done, I was casting around in my mind for, well, what can I write? Right. And then that came to mind. And of course, with COVID, I've been working from home. I've got a lot of time in my hands. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to write this. No better time. And the information has come from all over the place. It's come from you start off with looking for things on the internet, but then you look at, I've looked at the stories, but then I don't want to just pull things from the internet and just put it down. Oh yeah, that's my information. Right. I want to go back to see what the original parts of the story were, where this information's come from, and then I want to do a deep dive into that and see where did they get this information from. How trustworthy is it? Does it stand up to scrutiny? So I'm doing a bit of everything, really. I'm doing a bit of fact checking. I'm doing a bit of surmising as to what it could be. I'm knocking down some theories that have been, put forward in the past. I'm knocking down some of the established stories. There's an RAF story that I've seen in books from fairly kind of like respected authors, and it turns out it's a pack of nonsense. Right. So I've got one of those in the book, but that's not their fault. They're going on what somebody told them. But actually, if you dive a bit deeper into it, and you've got a bit of knowledge about how RAF records work and how crews worked and how squadrons worked, which not everybody does who looks at this the UFO topic, you can see that. And I've just went, oh, that can't be right. And then I did a bit more digging. That guy can't be where he said he was at the time he was, because the records don't support it, and he was somewhere else. Right. So that story doesn't hold up. And then everything else he says about, oh, hold on, that can't be right either. So there's a couple of stories which are in the established narrative which aren't correct. But you're going to get that with all stories. I mean, if you look back at Roswell, some of the witnesses from Roswell have been discredited over the years. And yet they were hailed as major linchpins in the narrative, So that happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, Roswell's a tough one to sort of to nail everything down and stop to get it. Once you nail something else down, something else starts wiggling and moving on the other side of it. So this was an interesting question, and I think we partly answered it just based on the question about German Foo Fighters. But he did ask, and I think you could apply this to the RAF and American side as well. did the Luftwaffe, how do you pronounce that? I always Luftwaffe. Every time I see it, I'm like, how do I say this word? Anyway, had a procedure to deal with these encounters. Germany is still today very, very reluctant to talk about the subject. But did the RAF, after encountering these things for, I don't know, a year or 2 years, was there any procedure put in place on any level from any part of the government on any side?
If there was, we're not privy to it. There were always ways to, if anything strange, like a German secret weapon, just for instance, a new form of flak or a new type of fighter or something was encountered, there were certainly ways that information could go to where it was needed in terms of intelligence. Because, as I say, the crews were debriefed when they got back to base, and if it was anything that was deemed important by the intelligence officers, because they were trained to spot stuff that was identifiable and information they could use, that would be passed up the chain. That report that I read out about the 200, 300-foot object that was seen over northern Italy, that report was definitely passed up the chain, because you can, if you dig into the records, you can see the files where more senior officers were passing it to their superiors with comments to say, the crew stand by their story, that kind of thing. So certain aspects of it you can follow higher up. So there was a procedure. Whether it was an established procedure across the board is a completely different question, and that's not something that's really been answered, and I can't answer that. I've not found any evidence of it, but that's not to say that it didn't exist. But I suspect, bear in mind how the reporting went between squadrons, there wasn't any specific, or if you see a Foo Fighter, you must report it kind of thing. It was more just a kind of on-the-spot thing where if they saw something strange, they reported it. It was up to the individual whims of the various intelligence officers for each squadron whether they passed it up the chain or not. The Americans had a similar thing, although in the night fighter squadrons, especially the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron, the intelligence officer was very, very interested, to the point of where he compiled a list to send to higher authority, because he just didn't have a clue what was going on. And he'd actually been on a mission. He'd flown with one of the crews to see if he could see them for himself, and they did see them.
Wow.
They saw red lights.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was convinced, if you like. He hadn't been that convinced beforehand. He'd taken the information in good faith, and he thought he better go and see it for himself. And sure enough, he did. So,
I can tell you, just based off of this, and we've been going for an hour and 41 minutes.
Have we? Wow.
We have. And, man, I tell you, holy shit, does time fly, because the amount of information you've spit on this show has been phenomenal.
Oh, thanks,
to a point where we've got Zignal here yelling, I can't wait to read your book. And I'm right there with him. And then he's also got a request, which I love. Very much the definitive Foo Fighter book. Please call it fucking Foo Fighters. Perfect. I mean, you got it. I mean, if you call it that, New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, it might not get sold by Amazon though.
For sure. Well, I think if you write it exactly like Dan wrote it here, with the stars and
with the stars, that would work.
You might get away with it.
Funnily enough, it's in the text. It's definitely in the text, because I have explained how the name came across. So yeah, thanks, Dan. That's a lovely suggestion.
We also just want to say hi to Christina Gomez. She's in the chat. The young hotshot reporter over at the Debrief. She's killing it.
Hi, Christina.
And I love watching her channel grow, because I know in 5-6 years it's going to be one of the best things out there. She's working so hard to make it her voice, and she, like with any new venture, you're gonna have growing pains, man. Things happen, especially in the world of production and video and sound. Like, just look at what happened with Mystery Wire and their sound snafu that they had with Marco Rubio. It sounded like terrible, and those are professionals, so it happens. So I'm happy she's here. I'm glad she's enjoying this show, and I loved your interview with James Fox this morning. I thought it was killer. So let's see here. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up. Obviously, that would be great, you guys. And let's see here. Not many Gordy ufologists. Good on you, Graeme.
Jordy, even.
Jordy. Or I said Gordy. I didn't know what I was pronouncing. Jordy's where you're from, right?
It's a name given to people from Newcastle. We've got a strange thing in this country. You can go 20 miles and you can hear a different accent. We all have names for people that come from different parts of the country.
So see, I've never been to that part of the world, so I'm
so we've got Geordies in Newcastle. You go 20 miles, you go 10 miles down the road to Sunderland, you've got Mackhams. You go another 20 miles down the road to Middlesbrough, and you've got Smoggies. And then you've got Cockneys, Brummies, Scousers. You've got all of them. They're all different accents. I'm surprised you don't need subtitles for my voice.
Oh no, man, no. Like I was telling you before, the toughest accent I've had on the show was Andy McGrillen, but then, he's just, I love the dude. I love it. He sounds like Shrek when I talk to him. If
you ever talk about a Geordie accent, have you ever seen a show called Castle? About a private investigator. They once had an episode with a supposed Geordie on it, except whoever the actor was, he was doing an Irish accent. And people from my neck of the woods were going, "What kind of Geordie accent is that?"
Yeah, they just. I'm never watching Castle again.
And they even had this Celtic music as well, like these panpipe type things. So it's like, what's going on? So yeah, we get misrepresented all over the world now.
Well, hey, better than not being talked about at all.
This is very true.
Yeah.
This is very true.
So Shawnee said, wants to send you love from Wallsend.
Wallsend,
pretty close.
Yeah. Well, where I used to live in Gosforth, which is the north end of Newcastle. You'll know where it is. I now live in Northumberland. I live a bit further north now, so I live in the country nowadays.
I almost want to move there just to get a nickname, like Geordie. Just based on where I would love to see what they call my accent over there. Anyway, so before. I guess we could start wrapping things up, but was there anything else in this, in these picture presentations that you wanted to talk about that maybe we didn't get to because of the things we were discussing?
Well, it's just the one final thing, really, just to mention. So, I mean, this last picture here, again, it's one of these kind of, indescribable pictures where you've got like this little dark blob that's supposedly following this Ki-48 around, but it's another Japanese bomber. Don't even know where the picture's taken. You can't tell from the image what it is. So the pictures that you always see popping up on websites or books on the rest of it, half the time they're not even labeled correctly. I mean, I've seen.
Well, half the time, I think it's safe to say all the time. If it's a Foo Fighter and there's a picture of it, according to you, it's not. It's probably not real.
It's not even that, Lou. It's when you actually see what they're calling the aircraft or who's they're calling it. So they'll call it a Japanese aircraft because they're mostly of Japanese aircraft. These pictures, for some reason, they come out of there, but they'll say they're German or they're British or they're American, and that makes me think, if they can't even get that right, how the hell am I supposed to trust what they're saying?
So because
that goes on,
for someone like me who knows nothing about what different planes come from and what parts of the world they come from, if somebody showed me a picture like this and said this is a 1947 Foo Fighter, I'd be like, wow, that's amazing. Holy shit, why aren't we using this as evidence? So and then you laid out all the facts as to this is not even a World War II plane. This is a Japanese plane. We have no idea. Well, I'm saying, like, it's not even in the same part of the world. Like, it might not even be the same time frame,
Yeah. Well, the idea is that, this could be anything. I mean, that could be just a mark on the film. We've got no idea. We've got no idea of the photographer. We've got no idea of the location, all the rest of it. There's no context. I mean, at least today when we get images, we've got an idea of who took them, where they're taken, in the time frame, and it was a mission or not, and all the rest of it. And sometimes we even have people who can question. Whereas back then, you've got nothing like that at all. So it's impossible. I've heard David Marler, the researcher who's really into his triangular-shaped UFOs. He says that people send him pictures and film all the time and ask him to comment, and his default is, well, it's lovely, but I can't really tell you what they are because I've got no idea. And that's my kind of feeling with the pictures, is that they're lovely to look at, but they don't tell me anything. Because I can't even say that they're true. To me, my default setting is actually they're probably fakes, or they're just some kind of defect. And I suspect they probably are. I don't need to be a Mick West to tell you that. And that's not to say that I don't believe the phenomenon exists, because it does. There's sufficient information out there that the Foo Fighters were definitely something that people couldn't understand, and they still can't. However, the images that were taken at the time don't support that conclusion. So they're worse than useless. But that's just this is an illustration just to show you what is around there. But don't use it as a kind of, oh, well, this means that they exist or this means they don't exist. Yeah. It's just nice to see. But
I tell you what I love about reports over pictures is that for somebody to sit at a desk, whip out a pen, get out some paper or a typewriter, whatever you're doing at that time, even today, and to write a report. Because I've seen, I mean, I'm the son of a former retired police officer.
Yeah.
And the reports that he would have to write anytime there was a robbery were really intense and probably the least favorite part of the job because it's boring. You're forced to be a writer for 2 hours to write all the details and what happened. So for me, I always think it's a very telling sign when someone of high credibility decides to write a report and details their experience in reports. So I love stuff like that. So I really appreciate you bringing that to light. And just to set your mind at ease, Brandy Phillips here says, I could listen to your accent for days.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I could too. I mean, look, I think you guys over there in the UK are really self-conscious about your accents. They melt on the ear. Like they are butter for my ear. So honestly, I think that's part of the reason why this is almost gone for 2 hours, because I can listen to the sultry sounds of Graeme Rendall and Andy McGrillen all day.
I've never been called sultry before.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Thank you. My friend. Okay, so before we go, I have to ask you this last question. This is just a fun one. Are you a posh boy?
I've been told before that I have an educated Northumberland accent.
Okay.
Whatever the hell that means, I have no idea.
Own it, Graeme. Are you a posh boy?
I don't even know what a posh boy is. I've heard the phrase. Is that some kind of? Like,
I don't know what posh boy is, but I just wanted you to be like, hell yeah, I'm a posh boy. You know what? I'm a posh boy. I'm going to speak for myself. I'm a posh boy. Yeah, I don't know. Something about that phrase I really like. Okay, so Graeme, man, you have been so amazing with your time. I cannot believe, honestly, this is a really bad habit that I've got to really fix, but I forget to ask people sometimes how long they have to talk. But I would have had a feeling there would have been no limit with you just because we've gone for an hour and 51 minutes and it doesn't feel like you're forcing me off the phone here. So what an amazing conversation. I really, really loved your article. Again, I've got Graeme's links in the description below. So if you want to check out his article, please do it. It's a phenomenal piece of writing. They're doing, again, the Debrief is doing, I think, some of the best work out there. And I know you have some amazing things coming up that we can't talk about. We can't announce yet, but keep an eye on Graeme's Twitter account. Because I think they're going to have some very exciting news coming up here very soon. But before we go, please, Graeme, I'm going to give you the floor. Tell people where they can find your stuff, how they can follow you, how they can engage you in conversation, and even help you in research if that's something you're looking for as well.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to contact me is on my Twitter feed. So that's @Borders750. You can go from there, basically. And that's the easiest way to get in touch with me.
Yeah. Well, I've got your, let me pull up your Twitter account right here so people can take a look at it. Let's see here. This is I'm going into private messages here that everybody can see. Okay, here we go. Here we go. All right. So Graeme, we got you here. This is, and you got your, let's talk about your book here. Because I wanted to touch on that real quick as well. Just tell people about the books you've written and what's coming up.
No, I have one. I've written one book so far, and it's basically a travelogue from 1992. So 6 months after the fall of the Soviet Union, I was lucky enough to travel around northeastern Siberia on an aviation photographic trip, photographing aircraft that were either wrecked or out of service or still in service, but old Aeroflot airplanes that were used by the Russians. Now that's obviously a very secretive country back in the days of the communists, but managed to find out, to go around with no restrictions whatsoever. And when I came back, I wrote a book. Eventually, it took me sort of 27 years to come up with the courage to write it, but I did. So yeah, it's nearly 400 pages. It's got about 200 photographs in it. It's through Amazon self-publishing, so the photographs it's not as good as the ebook, but there is an ebook version as well, which
I just saw, we have Amazon Prime, so if you've got Amazon Prime, I'm not sure if you know this, Graeme, but the Kindle edition is free.
Yes, it is. We have Kindle. We have Kindle Unlimited in the UK. So if you have that, you can read it for free, and that's perfectly fine.
The paperback $17.99 on Amazon. So check it out. And then of course you've got your upcoming book, The Fucking Foo Fighters, right?
Well, that's what Dan wants me to call it. Yes. So obviously at the moment we've got a problem with COVID that some of the files that I need I can't access at the moment. So there's a few things I still need to tie it up. But once that's with me, then hopefully it'll be a matter of just putting it together.
Well, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah,
we're looking forward to it. And when the book's done, I would love for this to be the first stop that you make.
You'll get a copy.
Yeah. Oh, damn! I wasn't asking for that. I just want. Let me buy the copy, please. I would just want you to stop by and talk about the book when it comes out.
Fair enough.
That would be the only thing I'd ask you for. I guess that's it. I'm trying to look at the comments here. Brandy says that was an amazing information packed interview. Thank you so much. And I mean, we've got the links here, but just one more time for the fans. What's the name of the book? To the Ends of the Earth, a snapshot of aviation in northeastern Siberia, summer 1992, by Graeme Rendall. Love it.
There you go.
Love it. Awesome. And Signal's really loving the title of the book there. And pretty please put a link to his Twitter in the description for technologically challenged people like me. Let me just double check that for you, Brandy, but I'm pretty sure I put that in there. I did. I put Graeme's Twitter handle in the description. You've got the link to his debrief article, and then you've got the link to his Twitter, and then from his Twitter you can find all of his stuff. So with all of that said, Graeme, is there anything you want to end us with here?
Just a couple of things. Yeah, if you have a look at UAP Media's website.
UAP Media UK?
UK, yes. There are a couple of things on there which I've written. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the Shadows of Your Mind magazine. It's packed with great articles, not the one I wrote, but it's got a lot of good stuff in. But there is a Foo Fighter article which I wrote for the last issue, which is in there as well. So you can see that as well.
Yeah. Well, we did a review of the latest edition of Shadows of Your Mind magazine. I mean, of course, the episode is focused more on on the stuff written about me, because I'm a maniac. But yeah, no, the Shadows of Your Mind magazine, the work that you guys are doing, and let me just reiterate for everyone, all of these things are free for you to look at, including Graeme's book, which we just found out about. But the Shadows of Your Mind magazine is a free digital magazine download, and the information and the work and the layout of this magazine is phenomenal. So check out the Shadows of Your Mind magazine. Check out Signal, who's Dan Zetterstrom, who's in the chat here. Check out his artwork. We've talked about it a million times. We pointed out Graeme's mug. We pointed out my patch here. If you're interested in getting any of those things, check out his store. I mean, honestly, the work that you guys are doing over there is monumental. And it's a lot of time. I think it's a thankless job. So I just want to say thank you, seriously, for all the work, all the time that you guys are putting into this, that you're not being compensated for. You're just doing this because you have a genuine interest in this stuff. So I'm always fascinated to talk to folks like you, because I think passions are fun things to explore. So with all that, I really appreciate it.
I had no idea that article would take off as much as it did when I wrote it for the debrief. I thought it would be a minority interest article.
Nope.
That people would look at it and go, yeah, that's great, thanks. And getting Chris Mellon to actually say, read this, you could have picked me off the floor.
Well, really I can tell you what, if I'm being honest, Graeme, I saw Christopher Mellon retweet the article, which led me to it. And I was like, I got to talk to this guy. I got to talk to him. I just have to. I mean, not only, I knew you were coming onto the Big Phone Home and you've been helping us with that effort. But when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, because I've been doing so much stuff. It's really been hard for me to consume everybody's stuff because I'm newer to this universe. And so there is so much to consume, so much great information that I've been exposed to by the UAP Media UK, by Dan, by That UFO podcast, by a lot of you guys in a different continent than me, have helped me so damn much. So again, thank you. For everyone out there, before we go, of course, I want to remind you of the Big Phone Home, Saturday, April 24th, 2021. Graeme, are you going to be stopping by with, hopefully with Dan and some of these guys and talking to us for a little bit?
If you want me to, I'll be there.
Of course. Yeah, you're on the email list, man. You're definitely going to be contacted.
We're
going to be doing half-hour time slots for everybody. You guys on the UK will get the first dibs because of the time difference. So I want to make sure whatever times you guys pick, those are the times you guys get first dibs to. Everybody else here in the States is going to get second dibs. So I'm happy. I'm happy that you're part of the effort. I'm happy that you're going to be joining us that day. Don't forget to like the channel, obviously, like this video. Subscribe to the channel. We're, I think, only 20 subscribers away from 800. We are so close to monetizing this channel without asking for money. Help us get to 1,000. We're on the road to 1,000. We've already reached our watch hour times. So, I think that's pretty rare for you to reach 4,000 hours of watch time without even hitting 1,000 subscribers. So that means the channel's doing something right. You guys are digging the content. Share it, like it, subscribe, and ring that bell. That way you are notified anytime we have wonderful conversations with people like Graeme Rendall, or wonderful conversations with Andy McGrillen. And hopefully we're going to have Dan on here to talk about his artwork. I know he's really camera shy, but we're going to get him on here. We have to, because he's amazing. But anyway, with all of that said, I want to say thank you to the sponsor, BlueMarlinChronicles.com, who, by the way, is going to be stopping by the Big Phone Home and talking to us. So that'll be a lot of fun. But for the record, everybody, that's my dad. And then also I want to say thank you to DOS Tapes. They provide all of the music you hear on the show. Their SoundCloud link is in the description below. My information is also in the description below. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, I've got the link tree. All of that stuff is there. Again, don't miss Saturday, April 24th. We're only 1 week away. Co-host Michael Mataluni and I, the Big Phone Home. We've got Graeme, we've got the SCU, we've got all sorts of people stopping by. It's going to be a really incredibly fun day, and we want you guys to be there and interact with us and support us just like you're doing now. So with all of that said, all of that out of the way, thank you, Graeme, for coming aboard, getting weird with me here on another episode of the Unidentified Celebrity Review. Until next time, you guys, stay safe out there. Peace.
Unidentified. Unidentified.